San Pietro al Natisone con delega ai gemellaggi. E nel caso specifico sono la responsabile per il progetto che stiamo per avviare e sarò per tutto il periodo la vostra referente. Come sapete, i comuni di San Pietro al Natisone come capofila del progetto e di Sambreville come comune gemellato hanno aderito al progetto europeo Cittadini per l'Europa, cofinanziato dall'Unione Europea. Il tema principale del progetto è la celebrazione del 70° anniversario della Schuman Declaration del 9 maggio 1950 e la sua attualizzazione nel contesto di un processo di maggiore integrazione. Il programma si svilupperà nell'arco di 21 giorni, a partire dal 20 del 4 al 9 del 5, e prevede il coinvolgimento di più di 100 studenti, di cui 55 provenienti da Sambreville, più insegnanti ed autorità. Le attività progettuali da sviluppare saranno in parte online e in parte in presenza e si costituiranno di 5 webinar coordinate da esperti che sono stati scelti insieme ad ISIG, Istituto di Sociologia Internazionale, per i 5 assi di temi prioritari del progetto: economia, sicurezza e confini, fiducia nell'istituzione, ambiente, educazione. Ci sarà poi un gemellaggio in presenza a San Pietro al Natisone nelle giornate del 7, 8, 9 con workshop sulle tematiche precedentemente discusse nei webinar, evento finale con creazione da parte degli studenti del manifesto sul futuro dell'Europa. Ogni comune del progetto, rappresentato da una delegazione di studenti partecipanti, porterà le proprie istanze e riflessioni sulle tematiche in oggetto davanti alle autorità locali dei suddetti comuni. I webinar verranno registrati e pubblicati successivamente su canale YouTube dedicato del Comune e potranno essere ascoltate dalle persone indirettamente coinvolte nel progetto. Dal giorno 7 al giorno 9 tutti gli studenti belgi e locali saranno impegnati nelle sedi appositamente scelte presso il nostro Comune in delle workshop interattive per discutere insieme ai relatori di ISIC degli argomenti precedentemente trattati durante i webinar. L'ultimo giorno del progetto verrà firmata dalle autorità istituzionali presenti un manifesto per l'Europa preparato dagli studenti partecipanti al programma e che riassumerà a brevi punti il lavoro svolto e gli obiettivi raggiunti dal progetto. Tutte le attività del progetto saranno disseminate sui social. Nel rispetto della privacy chiediamo a tutti i ragazzi di tenere le videocamere oscurate ed il microfono spento, attivandolo solo in caso di richieste di interventi. Grazie a tutti et bon lavoro. Bonjour à tous et merci d'être présents aujourd'hui. Je me présente, je suis Cathy Crisetti, conseillère de la municipalité de San Pietro al Natisone en charge du gemellage. Dans ce cas précis, je suis la personne en charge du projet européen que nous sommes sur le point de démarrer et je serai votre interlocuteur pendant toute la période. Comme vous le savez, les communes de San Pietro al Natisone, en tant que chef du projet, et de Sambreville en tant que commune jumelée, vont collaborer pour le développement du projet européen Citoyens pour l'Europe, cofinancé par l'Union européenne. Le thème principal du projet est la célébration du 70e anniversaire de la déclaration Schuman, 9 mai 1950, et son actualisation dans le cadre d'un processus de plus grande intégration. Le programme se déroulera sur 21 jours, du 20-04 au 9-05 et implique l'implication de plus de 100 élèves, dont 55 de Sambreville, plus enseignants et autorités. Les activités du projet à développer se dérouleront en partie en ligne et en partie en personne comme suit. 5 webinaires coordonnés par des experts qui ont été choisis avec l'aide de ISIG, Institut de sociologie internationale, pour les 5 axes prioritaires du projet: économie, sécurité et frontières, confiance dans les institutions, environnement, éducation. Extrait du livre blanc sur l'avenir de l'Europe. Jumelage en présence à San Pietro al Natisone les jours 7, 8, 9 avec les ateliers sur les sujets précédemment abordés dans les webinaires. Événement final avec la création par les étudiants du manifeste sur l'avenir de l'Europe. Chaque commune du projet, représentée par une délégation d'étudiants participants, apportera ses propres demandes et réflexions sur les enjeux en question devant les autorités locales des communes précitées. Les webinaires seront enregistrés et publiés ultérieurement sur la chaîne YouTube dédiée de la municipalité de San Pietro et pourront être écoutés par les personnes indirectement impliquées dans le projet. Du 7-9 au 9-5, tous les étudiants belges et locaux seront engagés dans les lieux spécialement choisis de notre commune dans des ateliers interactifs pour discuter avec les intervenants de l'ISIG des sujets précédemment abordés lors des webinaires. Le dernier jour du projet il y aura la présentation d'un manifeste qui sera signé par les autorités institutionnelles et précédemment préparé par les étudiants participants au programme et qui résumera en bref point le travail effectué et les objectifs atteints par le projet. Toutes les activités du projet seront diffusées sur les réseaux sociaux, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube et sur les pages des 2 communes concernées. Dans le respect de la privacy, nous demandons à tous les étudiants de garder les télécaméras sombres et le microphone éteint, en ne l'activant que dans le cas de demande d'intervention. Je vous souhaite à tous une très bonne écoute et je vous laisse dans les mains de nos experts qui suivra le webinaire en langue anglaise, come concordé. Ok, e lascio quindi a questo punto la parola alla dottoressa Marina Andeva, la quale ci presenterà la tematica relativa alla fiducia nelle istituzioni. Vi ringrazio tutti per la collaborazione, soprattutto ringrazio molto la dottoressa Andeva per per aver accettato di darci il suo appoggio e auguro a tutti un buon lavoro. E raccomando a tutti di tenere le telecamere e i microfoni spenti e di attivarlo solo nel caso in cui serva fare delle domande. Grazie a tutti e buon lavoro.
Thank you very much, Katie, for introducing me, and thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this big, very important project, especially when time comes when there is really a little bit of crisis of trust, of crisis of politics implementation, and crisis of institutional settings and framework within the European Union. I'm very glad that the students will be able to grasp a little bit the idea of what it means to be a complex organization, a complex union, such as the European Union. And because of this, I have prepared 3 small, let's say, PowerPoint presentations where you will be able to a little bit introduce yourselves to the institution, to the policies, and how policies are shaped and made. The rationale behind this is because if we trust someone, then we have to know that person. You trust your friends, you trust your colleagues, but the trust is based on several indicators, right? The first thing is whether you know that person and what are the characteristics of the person and the actions that the person has. In overall, in the European Union, the citizens' trust have been decreased since its beginning. So if we know that at the beginning with the Schuman Declaration and the 3 European communities and then merged into 1 European Union, the trust was even bigger. But how times comes, how challenges in the international community and international relations come, the trust in the EU institutions especially have decreased by the citizens because they have actually seen that there is no, move forward from the promises that European Union and institutions made. I am an associate professor at the University American College Skopje. I'm also a researcher at the Institute of International Sociology of Gorizia, and I teach EU structures and institutions at graduate students at my university in Skopje, North Macedonia. So this is really my topic of my interest and a topic that I really share with the students with lots of joy. Maybe you are aware of, I assume that some of you are aware of mostly about the general framework of the EU institutions, the EU, but it's a complex mechanism. And because it's a complex, trust is really hard to measure. We have the European Council, we have the Council of the European Union, we have the European Parliament, the Commission, the committees, the Committee of Regions and the Economic and Social Committee, the European Court of Justice, the Central Bank, the Investment Bank, and the European Court of Auditors. But this is not all, of course, because each of these institutions have their own bodies, committees, agencies, programs that work throughout the European Union and have also headquarters in different member states. For the for the time's sake and for the, I'm sorry for my cough, but I got a cold, so I hope this won't bother you, and I hope everything will be clear of what I say. For the sake of the time being and individualizing the most important institutions that we need to know, I have identified, of course, the 4 of them, and that is the Council, the European Council, the Council of the European Union, the European Commission, and the European Parliament. Each of these institutions have their own competences. The European Council directs the direction of the European Union. It is high-level political body where presidents come, where prime ministers come. It is really the high political profile of each member state that meets once or twice a year in order to discuss the future of the European Union. So it's a very important body, and it is a political forum. The Council of the European Union decides. So it is a body that actually has competence as a parliament, as a national parliament, as a legislative body. What does it mean, legislative body? It means that adopts law, regulations, rules, such as the Senate and the Congress in many countries. European Commission executes. What does it mean? That it is a sort of a government, but it's on a European level. European Parliament, the name says it all, and it has a very important role together with the Council of the European Union to co-decide on different issues. You also have on the slide information about the different committees and bodies within the European Union and what they do and how they interact in brief. There is an interaction between these bodies. They're not institutions, they're not alone in the whole complex mechanism, of course. The European Commission, the Council, and the European Parliament are always together to decide major issues that are concerning the European Union. The European Council is the guidance, like I said, so it's apart, it's taking it apart. The European Court of Justice is the one that oversees the legality. What does it mean? That each decision, regulations, directive, decisions made also by member states if vis-a-vis or versus countries or versus institutions of the European Union. Decisions by the European Commission that concern single member states are overseen by the European Court of Justice in order to ensure that all the decisions, all the little details, little articles that are there in the documents are actually in accordance with the founding treaties of the European Union, those constitutions, as if we might call them that, the founding documents as a general legal foundations. Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions are there for a specific purpose. The name says it all. The Committee of the Regions makes sure that the regions, regional administration, public administration, local administration in all the member states are taking care of their interest. And it gathers together many officials from regions such as presidents, consuls, representatives of councils, local self-governments in one place, and discusses the major and emerging issues that can be encountered on the way and the everyday work of the regions. Economic and social committees take care of economic and social issues that are actually part of the competences of the European Union. The European Parliament, the European Commission, and the Council of the European Union have many details, many complex structures within. For example, the European Parliament has these plenary sessions. It's like at every parliament on a national level, there are also plenary sessions where all the members of the parliament, called MPs, vote for a specific issue and they are adopting a law. So the same thing goes with the plenary sessions of the European Parliament, which always takes in Strasbourg. There are 17 committees, which are seated, some in Brussels, some in Strasbourg. These 17 committees are divided into several policies. For example, transport, telecommunication, infrastructure, economy, finance, education, science, research. So these are committees that are actually dealing with the scrutiny and reading of the text where the European Parliament have to read and have to adopt. There is the Secretariat, like every institution. And the European Parliament has its Secretariat, which is seated in Luxembourg. European Parliament is also a political body. And you know, and on a national level, parliaments have political parties. So the same thing goes at the European Parliament, where political parties, which are European political parties, are made into groups according to their ideology. So are there social democrats, are there conservative parties, are there environmentalists, Greens, are there for the future of Europe? They have different ideologies. And according to these ideologies, national parties can affiliate to European Party and be represented at the European Parliament. There is also the president, and there are the 14 vice presidents. This is the seat at the plenary, the photo of the plenary session, plenary room, the hall of the European Parliament. This is the official logo of the Parliament. And the European Parliament has a very interesting story behind how it was founded, actually. It was first initially planned to be just an assembly or just a group of representatives from the member states to decide on major issues within the European communities. So you know that there were 3 European communities at the beginning, and each of these 3 European communities have their own have their own assemblies, actually, because they were, according to the official treaties that were founded on, they were separate entities. And these separate entities have their separate assemblies. And this is where the origin of the European Parliament goes. But then in like 10, maybe a couple of years later, the European Parliament has started to have its own shape, meaning that it joined actually the assemblies that were initially established by the 3 communities into a one body, the European Parliament, but was never seen as something that is a direct representation of the citizens. So citizens were not able to vote directly for their representatives, such as in the national parliaments. Back in 1976, then, with a special summit at the Paris summit, the European Parliament took a major role, and that is a major shift of its characteristics. What does it mean? That first time in history, after its establishment, it is Parliament as it resembles on a national level, when there is a direct universal suffrage, or it means that citizens of the EU, of the member states of the EU, can directly vote for their representatives, but within their member state. Of course, they vote within the member states, and then members of the parliament which are actually voted on a national level are sent to the European Parliament to work as members of the European Parliament. In 1979, a cornerstone of the history of the European Parliament, the first elections took place. And it is really an important historical moment for the Parliament. It has this organization, which is very much similar to national parliaments in general, let's say, because different countries have their different settings. But it is this group assembly, there is a bureau, there is a presidency, where the presidents and all the vice presidents come. There are the committees, as I mentioned, and there are delegations from the member states. And there is a chairman of the sessions, of course. The Parliament has these political bodies. What does it mean? That these political groups formed of political parties form their political bodies, such as the committees and delegations. And this organization enables the European Parliament to interact directly with national parliaments. Why is this important? Because each decision that is made on a national level or a decision made on a European level has to be communicated somehow, right? So it has to be in an interaction with national and European level, because European Union is composed of member states, and the member states all have their national parliaments and national legislation and national framework. And this national framework, depending on the policies and the field, have to be harmonized and identical for all the member states on a level of the European Union. So this is why it's important that there is an interaction on a national and European level. And the president is elected for a renewable term for 2.5 years. As every president, it represents the institution where the president is, right? So it represents the European Parliament vis-a-vis or versus other institutions, relations with other states in the world, relations with other organizations in the world, also relations with EU institutions within the European Union. It oversees as a general manager, if we can say that, the work of the parliament and the bodies and all the hierarchy behind the organization of the parliament. It sets out the parliament points of view and the concerns as regards to what is on the agenda, what will be discussed, and the other subjects that needs to be discussed and negotiated within the European Union. And of course, because a major competence of the European Parliament is to adopt the whole budget of the European Union, then the president signs this, and as soon as it's signed by the president, the budget is operational and can be used. So this is also a very crucial role. This is a little bit of timeline of, sorry, what does it mean, the powers of the European Parliament and how they increased in overall from 70s to 75 to give it a certain role in giving a legislative role or adopting. And remember that at the beginning, the European Parliament did not have a power to adopt legal acts. This was only an exclusive right to the to the Council of the European Union, which I will speak later on. So how times comes in the history, the European Parliament took major competences and roles in different fields. And in the Maastricht Treaty, the really shift of the history of the EU, the European Parliament was part as in a co-decision procedure, meaning that it took a role in the decision-making process of the European Union alongside with the Council of Europe. It's called co-legislator, a role of a co-legislator. I come from North Macedonia, that it's currently a candidate status, and there is a long process of negotiation, of course, to enter as a member of the European Union. But if time comes in the future when there should be a decision that the North Macedonia will enter in the European Union, then the final approval for membership will be made by the European Parliament. So this is also a very important role and competence that is made by the Parliament. The European Parliament represents the interests of the EU citizens, and that is very important. I always speak to students why it's important to really understand the European Parliament, because this is the only institution, legally speaking, that is directly connected to the citizens. How? Through democracy, through the elections that are organized on regular basis to have a representation in the European Parliament. So this is the link when you vote and then you send your representative to an institution. No other institution within the European Union has these characteristics. They are all sent by the governments, national governments. So the ministry or the government will decide, Marina, Anna, Tina or Tom or whatever, they will be sent to the council. They will be one that representing us without asking the citizens, because you already elected your parliament, you already elected the government. So it's a direct representation that you're doing. But in the European Parliament is very different. And in the European Parliament, it is the one that really, even by the constitutive acts of the Parliament and by the treaties, it represents the interest of the EU citizens. It serves and protects them by this link. It has this ratification roles, of course. What does it mean? That every act that is adopted, it is ratified, it is adopted with qualified majority voting, which means that 2/3 of the members of the parliaments need to vote in order for these provisions or modifications to take place. European Parliament is a fun fact. It's also the only institution, not well with this important role, but an institution that, unlike the Council of European Union, doesn't ask for a consensus. What does it mean? So we have 27 member states in the council, and all 27 member states have to say yes or no, right? Unanimous vote. This is a consensus. But the parliament works in different ways, such as a national parliament. Sometimes it asks for really a simple majority voting, which means, I don't know, for 100 people, 50 plus 1 will vote for yes, and then an act or a rule will be applied. Or a qualified majority voting, where 2/3 of all these 100 people have to vote for yes in order for this to be approved. There is no need for a consensus. Another important role of the European Parliament is the role to elect and discharge or dissolve the Commission. So it has a little bit of a political control over the Commission. What does it mean? It's a political control over the government, because the European Commission is actually a government on a European Union level. It is the same thing as in a national level, if you think about it, because the parliament is the one that is creating the government when it's elected by the citizens. So this is the same thing, and it's easy really to remember. How does it exercise its powers, the European Parliament? There are two very important legislative procedures. It's called, the first one, ordinary legislative procedure, and the second is special legislative procedure. In the ordinary legislative procedure, which I will mention afterwards, the Parliament actually co-decides with the Council. In the special legislative procedure, it is called special for a reason, the Council is actually having a primary role, and the European Parliament is only invited as a consultant, just to make a recommendation, or the Council of the European Union just consults the Parliament without any legal binding force. It also makes his decisions with cooperation, ascension, or right of initiative. For example, it can ask for the European Parliament to put on a proposal meaning a document, a legal act, which will be then viewed by the European Parliament. It can also cooperate in harmonizing legislation in fields such as taxation and competition. There is a direct universal suffrage, like I said. There is a uniform procedure for election, so electoral procedure. And there are some common principles that the European Parliament is defining in terms of its functioning and its elections. Because it's a very complex organization, union, there is a proportional representation, and it's not always that a member of the parliament have the same time period of his post or work there as a member of the parliament as on a national level. So it can differ. For example, I don't know, today we have the elections in the European Parliament. It doesn't mean that in Belgium and Italy also this year there are elections. It can be next year, or there were the previous year. So it does not match, because there are 27 member states, and it's really difficult this to arrange, and it's not even that purpose, and there is no need to do that, because this is a separate organization. So every citizen of the Union which resides in the member states, of which he is not a national, for example, Italians are now in Spain, shall have the right to vote and to stand as a candidate in elections to the European Parliament. So wherever you are, but you are a citizen of the European Union or a member state of the European Union, and you are in a member state of the European Union, you can go for a vote, and you can also be a candidate wherever you are. This is the freedom of movement that citizens of the member states of the European Union enjoy, and this is taken into consideration in the election procedure. European Parliament is a democratic supervisor. What does it mean? That it sees and oversees all the EU institutions and how they act and interact. And it can change law, so this is very important. And if some institution or something is not working within the institution, the European Parliament can ask from the Commission to have a proposal. Oh, look, the European Commission doesn't work like this, and it's not functioning. It's not producing result. Please, European Commission, send us a proposal where something can be changed so we can see that and change things. So this is a control that the European Parliament has. The other control, like I said, is the budgetary power, where the whole budget, millions of euros, are at the hands of the European Parliament to decide, but not only just a sum. It is really a complex budget that the Parliament has to take into account the different programs, the different agencies, the different institutions that they have to pay. Within the institutions, so many employees, so many officials, civil servants, all of these has to be, Erasmus have to be paid as well, right? As a program, as an educational program. So this is a very important role. As any institution within the European Union, the Parliament also can appeal. What does it mean? Maybe this term's a little bit of strange to you. I don't know your level of knowledge of English, but appealing means that if something goes wrong, in short terms, of simple terms, if something goes wrong within the work of the European Union and in these institutions, and cooperation also of relations between member states, and it's founded by the legal documents of the European Union. European Parliament does not care about national legal system. It only cares about the European legal system. Then it has the authority to appeal to the Court of Justice, and it is a proper court. It is like every national courts, and the courts then oversees the elements, the arguments, and decides and makes a decision. The European Parliament also appoints the ombudsman. Like most of the countries in the world, so there is not such universal practice of ombudsman. Different countries have made their different characteristics of ombudsmans. It is a person that defends the rights of the people, and in the case of the European Union, the ombudsman has a role in defending the right of the employees of the European Union and the basic human rights, the Charter for Human Rights of the European Union, without having any legal role. So we can recommend, we can issue some policies, some reports, highlight some things that are, to be highlighted, some challenges and problems, but it doesn't have a really strict legal role. And this is something, let's say, to be challenged about and to be taken into account when we talk about especially trusted institutions, if these institutions really have a power to do something and to change something, of course. The European Council also started at the beginning of the signing of this basic treaties of the European communities as a summit, as just a meeting of high-profile politicians that come into one place in a certain area and in a certain country or headquarters, and discuss the major political things and major political ideas that come into place. It has happened in the first initial years that it was only once a year, but then afterwards it came more frequently as meetings. Then in 1974, with the Paris summit, it turned to as a proper European Council, and a single European Act made it as a body which has to meet on a biannual basis. So it's a separate institution. Not much have been changed in terms of the powers of the European Council, of course, but it's something to be also considered as an important body. Head of states, governments, it has its own president, The president has 30 months of mandate of its election, so the president is elected among the members of the European Council. Another important figure that takes part of the European Council is the Commission's president and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security policy. Because the European Council because it's the highest political body, it gathers also these high profiles from other institutions, especially when it concerns the foreign relations and foreign affairs of the Union with other unions, organizations, and states. This is why it has this high representative of the Union within its, let's say, organization. It decides by consensus. So this is not something that the parliament has as a characteristics. Like I said, all 27 have to decide unilaterally on a specific issue. A driving point, a direction, points where the union will take place, whether it will be towards one issue or another, what will be the priority in the next years. It is a broad political decision-making body, a summit, which only gives a certain political direction with no real legislative power. Sorry. So even if it is the case that it's just a political body, it has its own little influence, and it's political influence, of course, and political influence is very important. It influenced foreign and security policy matters. It influenced judicial cooperation and police cooperation in criminal matters in the European Union and the member states. Also economic governance and multi-annual financial framework. And these are the areas which you see it in the capital letters. These are the areas where the European Council has a really high influence on the matters and cooperates closely with the Council of the European Union. Because it's a high-profile EU body, it appoints a lot of people within the European Union, such as electing the President of the European Council, the President of the European Commission. It appoints the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, officially appoints the entire body of the commissioners, appoints the Executive Board of the European Central Bank, including the President of the European Central Bank. I am finishing with this part of the presentation, and I want to ask the audience. I don't see you, unfortunately. It's really unfortunate for me because I usually want to see people. But do you have any questions? Any questions? No questions? Okay. I would like to come to the second part of my presentation. I'm just going to share it. Yes, perfect. Just to make it. Okay. I talked about the European Parliament and the Council, and I will later talk about when I will explain the special relations between the Parliament and other institutions about the Council of the European Union and the European Commission. But before I will go into that specific moment, I want to give you the attention of the EU policies. What does that mean? Because in different circumstances, we as regular, everyday citizens, we wonder whether this is really a EU rule or this is a national rule. Whether EU is imposing us to do this or it is something that our government is doing without any consultation from the EU. Is this really obligatory to do or not? So Policies are actually areas, fields of everyday community life where some things are regulated. And since the European Union is very complex in terms of its management, it is also complex to see how these policies interact between the competences of the European Union and the competences of the member states. So where do these EU policies come from? Where is the beginning? How come that they are EU policies? The founding treaties of the communities, the three communities, and then the founding treaty of the European Union actually are the cornerstone and the foundations, the roots of the tree of all these EU policies. Because in these texts, in these documents, there are single areas, single articles where they actually define what are the policies that are under the competences of the EU and what are policies that are shared with the member states, and what are the policies that are actually left for the member states to decide on their own. So if, for example, in a treaty or in the articles of the treaty, there is no mentioning of any kind of policy or development, that means that it's not regulated as an EU policy, and then it's left for the member state, Italy, Belgium, France, Spain, Austria, whatever country, to develop their own policies. How policies are shaped and how policies are managed depends on many issues. The first factor is what is the current leadership of the European Commission? Why European Commission is very important? Because this is the government within the European Union. And because it's the government of the European Union, who is the president of the European Commission is very important. Who are the commissioners is very important. What is the feeling within the European Commission, how this should be shaped and what should be done first. It's very important because all the proposals of new laws come from the European Commission. And this is why it is important. Another important thing is the different interest of the member states. You have very different member states. Difference in terms of territory, difference in terms of population, difference in terms of social and economical development, different in terms of resources, natural resources. So all these single member states have their own interest on developing something. This is politics, right? So they defend their own country, their own citizens, their own nationality, and they have their own sovereignty, and with right, of course, because they are independent states. And what is desirable for them as an interest to achieve, it is very important for how the EU policies will be shaped. So if they perceive that environment, for example, in the next 10 years, it's so important, then this could be something that they will push forward in the European Union agenda. They will push towards the European Commission to propose new laws for environment protection, for climate change combating, and this is where the direction will go. But if they feel that maybe perhaps we have to deal with migrants first, and refugees that are coming from different countries, such as now from Ukraine, and constantly coming from the other countries as well, then this will be where the countries will focus on in terms of policies and their development. But it's not that easy, of course. Sorry. It's not that easy because there are a lot of countries. It's not that easy because it's not the same thing for Portugal and Poland to deal with migration, right? It's not the same thing for Ireland and I don't know, Italy to deal with environment. They all have their diverse circumstances and conditions. So agreeing on a common thing is very, very difficult. And of course, the last, let's say, major factor, but there are a lot of those, is the capacity of the member state to actually implement these policies into practice. They are small and they are big member states. And by this, I mean they are economically wealthy or economically not that wealthy. So there is a high gap and differences, even though the European Union is always trying to minimize this gap and have this regional development equalized throughout the territory. But this is not possible. This is not utopia. So not every countries have their capacity to implement properly policies, and this is also something that European Union is struggling actually with. The European Union policies are divided into two general types. The first one is functional and the second one is sectoral. In the functional policies, we have policies such as the justice and home affairs. What does it mean? So all the police cooperation between authorities, judicial authorities, cooperation between ministries of internal affairs, of branches of ministries of internal affairs. Justice and home affairs is also part of the migration policies, asylum policies, etc. So this is where this first functional policy go. And the second one is cohesion. And the cohesion means all the idea of the European Union to equalize, let's say, the development, especially social and economic development of all the member states, by giving the member states an opportunity through the financial means and instruments as it have to contribute to their development in order to be more cohesive, for the European Union to be more cohesive, more united, and more cooperative. Research and technological development, I don't think that I have to explain this a little bit, education, cultural policy, and consumer protection policy. Sorry, it's not police, it's policy. This is also a very interesting part of the functional policies of the EU, where the consumers' rights are regulated and are separately protected throughout all the European Union and member states because of the reasons, and that is the four freedoms, right? We have the freedom of movement, freedom of services, freedom of goods, and freedom of capital. And because of this freedom, you have to have the consumer's protection right really regulated, and this is a separate functional policy, so the policy of the EU. The sectoral policies are the cornerstone of the European Union, and they're very embedded in the essence of the EU policy, such as common agricultural policy, fishing, fisheries, shipbuilding as part of the agriculture and fisheries. There are different degrees of EU policy involvement, and sometimes can be really an uncoordinated effort, an uncoordinated process, but sometimes can be really a smooth process depending on how the directions of the overall European Union goes. So in this slide, you can see the extent of EU policy involvement. What does it mean? So in the left column, in the far left column, you see the extensive EU policy involvement. What does it mean? That this is a policy, an area, a field where European Union decides the most, such as trade, because of the four freedoms, of course, and the economic communities and the single economic market, agriculture and fishing. These three policies have extensive and exclusive EU policy involvement, means that all the regulations, the legal rules are actually, most of them, sorry, legally binding by all member states. And member states have little to say about how it will be in their single countries because they are regulated on a European Union level. There is a degradation, as you can see from the columns. It's not really clear, like 20%, 40%. We cannot do this in numbers because this is really complex. It's a sea of regulations. And this is a generalized typology of the policy involvement. Considerable EU policy involvement means, of course, that the EU is very much involved in the development of these issues, such as how the market is regulated, and, of course, the monetary issues, such as the Eurozone, where countries are adopting the currency of the euro, this is where the Eurozone and the EU rules apply. And they cannot do otherwise because they have agreed to enter into the Eurozone. Something in the middle is the policy responsibility between the EU and the member states. And you can see that the list is numerous. I mean, there are a lot of them, and that most of the policies are actually entering into that area when there is a high cooperation between the member states and a European Union in regional policies, because there are regional authorities here that come in the competition, industrial sector, in the foreign policy, because there is no unique foreign and security policy. EU doesn't have an army. EU doesn't have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, EU diplomat, EU ambassador. There is no such a thing. Environment, equal opportunities, working conditions of the workers, consumer protection is also here, movement of people, macroeconomic issues, energy, cross-border crime, and transport. So this is shared responsibility between EU and the member states. So if you feel that in any of these fields something goes wrong, don't blame the EU. But this is something that is shared both with the EU and the member states. So you have to think about even further and say, okay, but this is not an exclusive right of the EU. And if something goes wrong, it means that all these member states didn't agree, or that my country, where as a member state of the European Union, has a different view and a different setting and a different rules. So it's not equal as the neighboring country or other member states' country. This is important to understand, of course, linking it to the trust, whether we trust or not, but before we trust, we need to understand how it functions. Then the EU has a limited policy involvement in certain areas such as health. You know what happened with COVID, so each country had their different circumstances, different rules, different settings. Generally, they all, let's say, followed their examples, but that doesn't mean that they were examples posed by the European Union or regulations posed by the European Union. Each country has their competencies in health, in education, even though we have this credit transfer system, the Bologna process, and etc. There are some general standards and guidelines that are followed, and this is the limited EU, let's say, involvement. But how you will do your curricula, what will be your textbooks, how you will organize your education system in the country is all up to the country. It's not about the European Union and how it will decide. Then we have the defenses, like I said. Each country has their own army. There is no European Union army, so there is very limited EU involvement. The EU involvement in terms is more of a political direction rather than a practical thing. And the social welfare, pension system, contributions to the funds. This is also linked with the health insurances. So this is the social welfare of people, marginalized people, how much they get. Apartments, different apartments for people with disabilities. So this is really the social care of the state that EU really has a limited impact. And no EU involvement. So EU is really not concerned, or virtually it says, but there is always a connection, you know, there is always reports what the country does and what are the best practices, let's say, is in the housing area, the civil liberties, and the domestic crime. There is a cross-border crime, of course, cooperation, like I said, in the shared policy involvement. But what happens domestically stays domestically, stay on a national level, and the European Union does not concern this, and it doesn't really need to be concerned about this. Another typology of the EU policy, especially the EU policy involvement, is to be made on whether it relies on a legal regulation or not. So there are some different policies, as you can see in the slide, as some of them are heavily reliant on legal regulation, such as trade, agricultural, and fishing. And those are the same policies that actually were before that are with highest involvement of the EU engagement. Then we have the very considerable reliance on legal regulations such as regional competition, consumer protection, working conditions of the workers, equal opportunities, how the market is regulated. What does this mean? I won't bother you with the typology of the EU law, but there are differences between EU legal acts, regulations, directives, decisions. If you hear about a regulation, that means it is a legal document binding for all the member states, and it's directly applicable. So if I say that trade, agriculture, fishing, equal opportunities and working conditions rely on legal regulation, that means that EU is adopting these regulations, which are to be put into force and valid for all the member states. There is also a mixture, you see, industrial, environmental, transport, movement, macroeconomics, and energy. This is something that both states, member states, and EU law complement each other, and they regulate this field. For example, in the transport sector, there could be some rules that apply because the member state says so, but there are also general rules on the EU level that are also applicable. And these rules combine together and they regulate the transport sector. There are also some legal regulation, but it's mostly on the interstate cooperation. So the state cooperate between each other, such as social welfare and energy. Usually these are, let's say, bilateral agreements between states where they can define recognized different qualifications, or they can trade with the energy sector. So this is highly dependable on how they interact between each other. Largely based on an interstate cooperation is the health, education, foreign policy, defense, law and order. So mostly in these sectors, country agree between them, not taking into account the over and broad area of the European Union, not under the umbrella, let's say, of the European Union, but mostly taking into account their own interests on a bilateral or multilateral level. So agreements between 2 or maybe 3 or 4 countries, a separate document, a separate rules that defines health condition, health services, education, foreign policy, defense policy, law and order. You know that some members of the European Union are part of NATO, some are not. So this is something that it's on an interstate cooperation, and every country can decide what to do in this specific field or not. It doesn't need to ask a permission from the parliament or the council or whatever, or the commission. It is such as predicted that within this policy, the sovereignty of the state is put into a priority, and they can decide and sign agreements on their own. The EU policy circle, it's very interesting because it's very complex again. As any policy, even on a national level, there should be an agenda. It's called agenda setting, or let's say today, the government is having a session, and we need to set the agenda now. What are we going to discuss? What are we going to do? What are we going to work? In which area? So we see that there are problems in the health sector. Let's talk about health. Let's see what we can do. And this is how the agenda setting is going on. Then from this agenda setting on the items that you want to put in the agenda, you formulate that in which direction. For example, if it's health, then what are we going to tackle first? Because there are a lot of things in the health sector. The third one is the legitimation. It means that this formulated, let's say, policy, let's say document, a draft document, is sent to those institutions that need to decide upon, and that is the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union. And then there is the adoption, so the procedure where these two, or maybe sometimes one, such as the council, will discuss on these issues and will adopt the final text. The fifth step is the implementation, which means that everything that is said in this piece of paper needs to be implemented, and the responsibility for the implementation goes both to the European Commission and to the member states. The European Commission has this role of guiding the member states because all these regulations are for the member states to implement them. It's not for the Commission to implement them. It's not the Commission that does the work for the member states. It's the member states that have to do. But sometimes member states can find difficulties, and this is where the European Commission has its role in order to guide, assist, and consult them. And then is the evaluation. The European Commission here has a major role because it can see through the years, so let's say 2 years, 3 years, 5 years has passed by since the first legal act on a health issue, and it can say, but something is not working. There are some difficulties. Member states are not obeying because of this and this and this. There are some difficulties in the implementation. This is not working as we planned. And this is the evaluation. And if they find something that is not working, they will start the process all over again. Set the agenda, formulate again a new proposal, adopt it, and implement it. And this is a circle. It goes around as a circle. The complex thing about the European Union policy cycle and policy making is that there is no single agenda, because each of the institutions can make their own agenda and say, please, this is a priority. Please, let's decide this first. Institutions can have their own agenda, such as the Commission, the Parliament, the Council, national agencies, some institutional agencies of Commission, like the Directorate Generals that are for transport, for environment, for culture, for education. They can have their own agendas. Member states can have their own agendas, or a group of member states, for example, Western Europe member states, Eastern Europe member states, Southern Europe member states can have their own agenda. National agenda of an individual state, Italy can say, really, now at this moment, I'm not concerned about health. More priority has to be given to the international crime. So let's do this, let's cooperate, let's find a common tool, common instrument, common law. Let's regulate this, because I have so many problems with this international crime. I have migrants pressing me on the southern border in the sea. I have multiple problems. There are trafficking of human beings, of drugs. I have really problems. Let's do this in the agenda. But other maybe countries don't have this as a problem. So it's difficult really to lobby and to set the agenda as a common agenda. And then you also have social agendas that are actually motivated by social groups, individual social groups, NGOs, think tanks, even political parties within single member states. So you can see how difficult it is for all these actors and parties to agree on such issues, right? Of course, there needs to be an identification of the solution to the problems, and there is always a differences between national and European agenda. Do you have any questions so far? I have talked about the adoption, I have talked about the implementation as well, and the evaluation as a final step is also a phase where multiple actors have the role, such as the European Commission, the Council, the Parliament. Reports have to be obtained by the member states, by interest groups such as multinational companies, firms, individuals as well. So they all have to report on the implementation and to see what is working and what is not, and whether a new law or a new policy have to be developed. If you don't have questions, I will switch to the third part, I see that the time is pressing, so I want to really be on time. Everything okay? You can hear me, you just confirm. So I won't feel alone.
We can hear you very well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to discuss in this third part about this common legislative procedure that this institution has. As I said before, while explaining the parliament, I said that the council has also a major role. And the council is actually a body which combines all the prime ministers and ministers of different portfolios in one place. So it has 27 members. Each country has their own one representative, a member. And this is both political and legal body. So major decisions are also made on the council level. And major decisions such as admission to new member states, discussion about the foreign and security policy, but also about different legal acts on an everyday basis. And we are going to see this in different steps, how it is done. It is a difficult process. It is a time-consuming process that is actually defined by the treaties of the European Union. I talked about policies and the agenda, right? The agenda setting. And once there is an agenda setting, there should be a proposal, right? So this is the part of formulation of the agenda. The Commission, the European Commission, as a government, a European government, if we can call that, has the exclusive right to submit legislative proposal to the European Parliament. And there is no deadline to this. So the Commission is ready. When it's ready, it submits and it transmits this to the European Parliament. In parallel, it also sends this to the Council of the European Union. Within the Commission, there is a college of commissioners called, so it is a group of commissioners. These are people, officials of the Commission, who adopt this proposal by a written procedure if there is no discussion, or by oral procedure if there is some discussion, some things that they don't argue with, they have something to say, some details have to be formulated, and they vote for the simple majority. Once it is voted, they send it to the European Parliament. Here is where citizens are involved, and it's a very important phase, because European Commission publishes this, publishes as an act, as a proposal, and it is in the official site, on the official Gazette of the European Union. Under a specific coding, you have the information on the slide. There are some coding systems adopted by the European Union when official documents are published within the official journal of the European Union. So this document is published as a proposal. When it is published as a proposal, the citizens can read it, right? It's public everywhere, in all the member states, in all the languages of the member states. So it's even easy to read. And you can read it, and if you are really interested about the topic and you see that you can be involved somehow and you can change, in this first step, you can do that by several channels that the European Commission is enabling. The next step, is where the Parliament reads this proposal. It's called a first reading. And during this reading, the Parliament examines the proposal and may adopt or just amend it, change it. There is no time limit. So let's say today the Commission is sending its proposal, is publishing its proposal, and then it's sent to the Parliament. from tomorrow, the Parliament needs to organize itself to have a first reading, but it doesn't have a time limit. It can be even next year in May 2023. It can be by the end of this year. There is no time limit for this, and this is very problematic. But usually the Parliament doesn't wait that long because it has to cooperate with the Council, which has the same rules. Let's say it doesn't have also the time limit. We'll see in the next step. And there is a pressure between these institutions, so they don't allow this for a big time frame to be. There are the committees within the Parliament, like I said, and they vote with a simple majority votes, or 50+1 of the total number of members of the committees. And if it's for health, then the committee for health will decide on this issue. There are also shadow reporters, called shadow reporters, and these are people from the Parliament that are reporting on the issues that are discussed within the Parliament and the state of art of this, let's say, proposal made by the Commission. Parliament, at the end of the first reading, if it adopts the proposal, it adopts it as a position of the European Parliament at first reading, and it officially publishes in the official gazette. The third step is when the Council comes. So this is the position of the Council, a very important one. It also, as the Parliament, makes this first reading. So during this first reading, the Council can decide to accept the Parliament's position, or to amend, change the Parliament position, or even to return the proposal to the Parliament for a second reading. So the Council said, what is this? No, we don't agree with this position of the Parliament. This has to be returned again for a second reading. And there is no time limit for this, so they can decide when they are ready to send it, or to decide to adopt it, or to change it. The citizens can be involved in such a way through their governments, because the Council is a representative of the governments of the member states, so they cannot be really influential on the Council decision and the proposal of the Council, but they can lobby through the governments. For example, you are now not satisfied with the position of the Parliament, and you go to your government, you lobby as a NGO, a political party, and you lobby to the government and say, please take this into account, don't forget about this issue. And this is how citizens are here involved. They can send their comments and they can send their concerns on the relevant national authorities. If the Council adopts the Parliament position without any changes, this act is adopted and published as a directive or a regulation or a decision jointly by the European Parliament and the Council. If the Council proposes changes or amends it to the Parliament position at a first reading, the resulting document is actually a position of the Council at first reading, because it's something that it's adopted. It's not fully accepted. In these particular circumstances, again, it is published in the official gazette. Let's assume that the Council returns it to a second reading. If it's returned to the second reading, the Parliament has to examine the position of the Council, or it can approve it, or it can reject it. If it rejects the position of the Council, the act, the text in front of them, will not enter into force, and the whole procedure will end. And when it ends, it needs to start then all over again. But if proposes amendments and returns these amendments to the Council, then the Council have to do a second reading. Now, because there is really a long procedure here, now there is a deadline. The Parliament has 3 months to conduct a second reading with a possible 1-month extension. The possibility of citizens to be involved here and to have changes in the text is very minimal. because it's already a second reading, it's already a formulated text, it already made it through the first reading, so it's really limited possibility for the member states, for the citizens of the member states to influence. And of course, if the parliament votes to modify the council position, it will adopt a document which is called Position of the European Parliament, adopted at second reading. Let's assume that even the council have to have the second reading. It has the same deadline of 3 months to conduct its second reading with a possible 1-month extension. There is no possibility for citizens to be involved, but maybe a slight lobby possibility to inform the members of the parliament participating in the committees and in the government on the points that citizens believe that have to be addressed. If there is an agreement reached of the position of the parliament at the second reading by the council, then the committee comes up with a joint text, which is a joint text approved by the conciliation committee. Why it is called a conciliation committee? Because if the council does not approve this, then a committee, a separate committee, has to be established in order to find a common understanding. If it approves it, then it's easy, then it will be adopted and it will be published as a joint text, a legal text. But something is not, sometimes it's not that easy. So there is a possibility for a conciliation committee. The conciliation committee has members, equal members from both institutions, from the European Parliament and from the Council. So these are representatives. And their mandate is, their responsibility is to find a solution, to find a common text where both Parliament and Council will agree with. If agreement is reached, then the committee comes with a joint text, which is approved by the conciliation committee and will be published in the official gazette. This published text of the conciliation committee has to come up with a third reading, because this is a conciliation committee. This doesn't come up from an institution such as a parliament and council. And this is why the next step is third reading both from the parliament and from the council. They have a little time limit of 6 or maximum of 8 weeks to examine the text and to approve it. And there is a special majority that needs to be taken care of, especially by the council, when the council needs to vote for 2/3 of all the members in order to approve this text. European Parliament adopts a special document called resolution. The council does not officially produce any document, but it states whether it agrees or not on the particular issue. And finally, there is a joint text, a legislative act, which is adopted and published, a directive or regulation or decision, depending how the Commission made the proposal of both the European Parliament and the Council. Once both European Parliament and the Council have approved this final text of the legislative proposal, it is signed jointly by the presidents and the Secretary Generals of both institutions, and are officially published in the official journal. And this is where it becomes official. And if it's a regulation, it becomes official even in the national legislation. If it's a directive, it leaves space for the member states to implement new rules that comply with the directive. And if it's a decision, it also applies directly in the member states. Decision, for example, may apply in specific cases, specific authorities, so it doesn't necessarily have to be for all the member states. It can be also pointed out to Italy or to France or to Spain or to Portugal. It doesn't necessarily have to be valid for all member states. This is a very complex system. Complex system that sometimes gives us a little bit of trouble understanding it, and understanding the fact that European Union is not an easy mechanism and an easy instrument, But on the other hand, it gives us a lot of benefits through its policies, through integrated system, to really mutual cooperation between different authorities and different member states. It is obvious, of course, to say that it's complex to work in such a big organization, but it's also complex as every state has a complex mechanism and institutions that they work with. So it's not surprisingly to see that even the institutions within the European Union have such big role and have such big complex situations and mechanism for deciding for the common policies, common decisions for member states, and a common fate for everyday citizens and people living in the area of the European Union. I will stop here and I will leave some time if there are any questions that you would like to address to me. Kathy?
Yes. Hi. It's okay. I think that the presentation, the excellent presentation of the trusting institution. I don't know if the students have the questions for you, and I ask them to tell you if they have the question.
Thank you. I really hope I was clear. My idea was for you to understand better the institutions and their roles, because in this way you will know how everything functions. But of course, if you have any question that I can answer in this time limit, just feel free. I'm here for all your questions.
Okay. If nothing, the question, we can close now. And we thank you very much to Marina for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and the webinar will be recorded and published on the municipality dedicated in YouTube channel. Okay, and if this is not the problem for you.
Oh, no problem, of course.
Ok. Ok, quindi ringrazio la dottoressa Marina per l'eccellente presentazione fatta, diciamo, sul tema di sua competenza, e ringrazio gli studenti che hanno partecipato, le scuole, nonché tutta l'organizzazione diciamo, per il progetto, e ringrazio le scuole di belghe e il signor Benoît per aver dato il suo ok, insomma, per partecipare al progetto. Et je vous remercie aussi en Belgique, M. Benoît, pour avoir participé au projet. Et nous remercions Mme Marina pour sa présentation. Et disons, s'il n'y a pas de questions de la part des élèves, nous allons fermer ici le webinaire qui va être ensuite enregistré et pourra être déposé sur le YouTube, disons, de la commune. Je remercie tout le monde et à la prochaine webinaire.
Goodbye.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.